This is a news on Baktyor Sanova, and let's go through the main headlines. At least 16 people killed in Israeli strikes on southern Lebanon despite ceasefire. Bolivia's president declares state of emergency over blockade crisis. And Spain criticizes plans to allow migrant detention centers outside the European Union. To the Middle East now. A ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is facing an early test after new strikes were reported in southern Lebanon a day after smoke was seen over the border shortly after the truce was due to begin.
On Friday, smoke rose over southern Lebanon after a US official said Israel and Hezbollah had agreed to a ceasefire. The truce was due to begin at 4 p.m. Lebanon time and was confirmed to Reuters by a senior Israeli official and 2 Hezbollah sources. But footage from northern Israel showed heavy smoke billowing across the border after the stated start time. Before the ceasefire was announced on Friday, residents were seen leaving parts of southern Lebanon as fighting intensified.
We left 3 days ago. It's been 3 days now, and now they started threatening. And the shelling is expanding and getting closer little by little. You know we have families and children with us, and people get scared. So we want to make sure the children are safe, and God willing, we will return.
On Saturday, Lebanon's state news agency reported Israeli airstrikes and drone attacks in the south, saying at least 16 people were killed. It said Israeli warplanes and drones struck the Nabatea area overnight and into Saturday morning, while artillery fire hit Nabatea and its outskirts before dawn. Israel did not immediately comment on the Lebanese state media report. Earlier, the Israeli military said it had targeted Hezbollah operatives and infrastructure in response to repeated ceasefire violations. The army also said its forces could act against threats in Lebanon under ceasefire restrictions.
There are restrictions. We operate within those restrictions in accordance with the directives of the political leadership. Again, when it comes to removing threats, we are authorized to operate in any area and will continue to act to eliminate any threat that is identified against our forces or our residents.
Iranian state TV says Tehran's negotiating team is heading to Switzerland for talks with the United States. A halt to fighting in Lebanon is a condition for 60 days of US-Iran talks on Iran's nuclear program, regional security, and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The interim deal calls for an end to military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon. But Israel says it is not party to the wider US-Iran agreement.
One of the world's most important shipping routes is returning to business after weeks of disruption. But while oil tankers are moving again through the Strait of Hormuz, new conditions imposed by Iran highlight just how fragile the situation remains.
Commercial shipping is picking up once again in the Strait of Hormuz after Iran and the United States signed an interim agreement aimed at easing tensions in the Gulf. Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority has introduced new transit procedures requiring vessels to submit passage requests at least 48 hours before arriving at the strategic waterway. During a 60-day negotiation period under the agreement, Iran says it will waive transit-related fees and cover security, safety and insurance costs associated with passage through the strait. The measures come after Iran's Supreme National Security Council ordered the expedited processing of transit requests following the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between Tehran and Washington. Traffic through the strait has already begun to recover. Shipping data showed several oil tankers entering and exiting the waterway on Friday, including vessels carrying crude oil, petroleum products, and liquefied petroleum gas. However, the situation remains fluid. Iran later announced plans to close the Strait of Hormuz again, only days after reopening it under the agreement, citing continued Israeli military operations in Lebanon. The announcement has raised fresh concerns over the stability of the ceasefire framework and the security of one of the world's most important energy transit routes. US President Donald Trump welcomed the resumption of commercial traffic, saying oil tankers were once again moving through the strait, while warning that Iran has 60 days to reach a broader agreement with Washington or face further consequences.
And now we have an agreement that was signed last night, and it's 60 days. They have to make a deal, otherwise we will do things that won't make them happy, but I don't think it's going to get to that. I think it's going to be very good. Remember, if we do that, then all of a sudden you're not going to have the oil flowing out of the strait too quickly, because people that own billion-dollar ships don't love missiles flying over them, don't love mines all over the water.
While technical negotiations have been delayed, the broader 60-day agreement remains in place for now. The coming weeks are expected to test whether the ceasefire can develop into a more lasting arrangement between Washington and Tehran.
Bolivia's political crisis is deepening after 50 days of protests and road blockades disrupted food, fuel and medicine supplies. President Rodrigo Paz reached a deal with the main workers' union, but several protest groups aligned with former President Evo Morales continue their blockades. Paz has now declared a state of emergency, allowing wider military deployment to clear blockades and restore order. The decree took effect immediately, but must be sent to Congress within 24 hours, with lawmakers given up to 72 hours to approve it or reject. The unrest began after Paz cut fuel subsidies amid a deficit, dollar shortages and IMF talks. Despite later concessions, unions and rural groups are demanding wage rises, an end to shortages, the release of detained protesters and Paz's resignation. The Cuban parliament has approved measures aimed at expanding private sector participation and attracting investment across the economy. This comes as the island seeks to weather U.S. sanctions that have deepened its economic crisis.
Following a move by Cuban lawmakers to approve sweeping reforms that would privatize a large portion of the country's socialist economy, Havana residents have reacted with cautious optimism. The measures, backed by the Communist Party in a bid to withstand punishing U.S. sanctions, would open the door to private banking and real estate development, while allowing businesses to hire more than 100 employees for the first time. Some residents welcome the changes, while others express skepticism over whether they would be implemented.
We are at a moment when what we have is not working, and if new measures come, even if they are capitalist, but the population can improve, eat better and stay afloat, then the measures are welcome.
If you expand the private sector and collect taxes as they really should be collected, and don't create a commission of inspectors who will later fine them or take away their money, it means the measures are good, they are positive. I agree.
The 176 measures are aimed at further decentralizing Cuba's state-run economy, which has been left struggling by a tightened embargo under US President Donald Trump. Since January, Cuba has been under a harsh energy and financial embargo, effectively restricting access to fuel, its main energy source, and deepening a crisis that had already been worsening over the past 5 years. Under the island's current economic model, the government largely determines what is produced, the prices at which goods are sold, and how the country's resources are allocated. If implemented as approved, the measures would represent the most significant change to Cuba's socialist model since former leader Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution, and mark a major shift towards a market economy. In approving the reforms, Cuban authorities cautioned that implementation could be slow and noted that the measures may not be viable unless the United States lifts the energy and financial embargo on the island.
A fire at a beach resort in the Dominican Republic has killed one person and forced nearly 1,700 guests to evacuate. Authorities said the blaze broke out at a beach hotel in the Bayahibe, killing 46-year-old Italian national. 3 people were taken to medical facilities while 6 others were treated at the scene, including guests, visitors and emergency responders. The fire has since been brought under control, but investigators are still working to determine its cause. Guests were moved to nearby hotels. Western Europe is bracing for another spell of extreme heat, with health warnings issued in several countries as temperatures climb, as well as above seasonal averages. France has placed dozens of departments under orange heat alerts, with record temperatures possible in the coming days. In the UK, an amber heat warning covers parts of England and Wales, with temperatures near 34 degrees Celsius. Southern Spain could exceed 40 degrees Celsius, while Germany may reach the mid-30s before storms arrive. The latest developments in the Russia-Ukraine war today centered on renewed Russian strikes on Kharkiv, Ukrainian drone activity against Russian energy infrastructure, and competing claims from both sides over overnight drone attacks.
In Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv, local authorities say Russian-guided bombs struck a low-rise apartment block in the early hours of Saturday. Officials said that a body was pulled from the rubble hours after the attack, and at least 9 people were injured, including a 6-year-old child, with 5 people taken to hospital. Authorities also reported a separate Russian drone strike on a civilian car in Kharkiv on Friday evening. According to Sini Hubov, a man was killed and the woman driving the vehicle was injured. Residents described scenes of panic as the building collapsed around them.
I didn't even have time to open the door. I heard the air raid siren, then a click, and everything started crumbling on my head. I just crouched down like this. Once I dug myself out, I started screaming, calling for my family.
I got dressed, went outside and saw such a massive pile of rubble. The house was completely destroyed. The emergency services arrived immediately. They pulled my son, Serhiy, out first and loaded him right away. His leg was torn off.
Moscow did not immediately acknowledge or comment on the Kharkiv attacks. On the Russian side, officials reported Ukrainian drone activity deep inside Russian territory. Governor of Russia's Tyumen region in western Siberia said Russian air defenses repelled a drone attack on an oil refinery. He said there was no damage to the facility and that staff had been evacuated. Russia's defense ministry said its forces shot down 177 Ukrainian drones overnight. The attack came as European Union leaders meeting in Brussels agreed to extend economic sanctions on Russia for another year and reaffirm support for Ukraine. EU officials also discussed Ukraine's accession process and future diplomatic efforts, with European Council President Antonio Costa announcing plans to establish a direct communication channel with Moscow.
The European Union has signaled a renewed sense of unity on Ukraine. At the latest European Council summit, all 27 member states unanimously adopted conclusions on Ukraine for the first time since early 2024, ending a period in which divisions, particularly over support for Kiev, often prevented consensus. EU leaders reaffirmed their commitment to a comprehensive, just and lasting peace, while expressing readiness to play a greater role in diplomatic efforts aimed at ending Russia's war against Ukraine. To discuss the significance of this development and its implications for European security and the future of Ukraine, we're joined by Professor Ivani Vassiler of the State University, speaking to us from New York. Professor Vassiler, welcome and thank you for joining us.
It is a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Vassiler, how significant is it that all 27 EU member states were able to agree on a common position regarding Ukraine? And what factors do you believe made this consensus possible?
So it's obviously very significant considering that the Ukrainian-Russian war is now in its 4th year, going to the 5th year. And after all these years, there have been a lot of back and forth regarding aid and support to Ukraine. And now we have a consensus of the entire European Union. And this was made very clear in the past few days during the G7 meeting in Paris, when the President of the European Union Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, emphasized very much this unity. One of the reasons, certainly, or one of the factors why this consensus is coming now is the realization of European Union countries that United States has disengaged from Europe, or at least from the security issues in Europe. And therefore, Europe now has the entire responsibility to take care, to solve, to manage this war in the European territory. And this is what promoted this type of consensus.
Professor Wasseler, the EU says it's ready to step up its engagement in diplomatic efforts. So what could a larger European role in peace negotiations actually look like in practice?
The European Union, first of all, I think it's important to note that the European Union is providing aid, according to the latest announcement. There is a European Union package, but this also includes Great Britain of $90 billion to Ukraine. And the European Union has expressed the willingness to negotiate with Russia. We don't know how this is going to develop. We don't have details. If the European Union wants to have direct negotiations with President Vladimir Putin, or if European Union is going to use a model that is very common in this type of negotiations, in other words, to use a mediator, another country, to be conducting the negotiations between the warring parties. But yes, and the European Union has a great deal of experience in diplomacy and should be able to assemble or have a framework for negotiating the end of war. But it's a very complex process, including the fact that very likely any negotiation will have to force Ukraine to concede part of its territory.
So Ukraine has now entered the first phase of formal EU accession negotiations. How does this development affect the broader political and strategic landscape in Europe?
The idea that Ukraine should join the European Union is not new. At least comes from 2014, more than 10 years ago. So it's something that is always in the mind of the European Union leaders and certainly in the mind of Ukrainians, if not all, most of them. The negotiations for Ukraine to join the European Union is an important step because with the promise to join the European Union, there are more probably prospects for more aid from European countries going to Ukraine. And in this sense, more possibilities for Ukraine to negotiate with Russia.
Professor Ivana Wasseler, thank you very much for joining us from New York and sharing your insights. We greatly appreciate your time and perspective. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A large group of migrants tried to cross the English Channel on a small boat from the French coast near Wissant on Friday. According to official figures, more than 200,000 migrants have crossed the channel in small boats since records began in 2018. British leaders have repeatedly promised to stop these crossings. Former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak pledged to stop the boats, while Prime Minister Keir Starmer promised action against the gangs organizing them. More than 72,000 migrants have arrived in the UK through this route since Starmer took office, with many later applying for asylum. Europe is moving toward tougher migration rules, including plans that could allow rejected asylum seekers to be held in centers outside the EU. But Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says offshore detention is not the answer, highlighting divisions within Europe over how to handle migration.
Spain's Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, has criticised plans to allow migrant detention centres outside the European Union, saying the proposal will not solve Europe's migration challenges. Speaking after an EU leaders' meeting in Brussels on Friday, Sanchez said Spain had been clear from the beginning that offshore detention was not the right approach.
We had this debate 2 days ago in the European Parliament, when a majority of the right, together with the far right, proposed establishing these detention centres for the deportation of migrants in Europe outside the European continent. This is an ongoing debate, and Spain has been clear and unequivocal on this issue from the very beginning. We believe that this approach will not provide any solution.
His comments came days after the European Parliament approved a major overhaul of the bloc's migration policy. The reforms would speed up deportations and allow EU countries to move rejected asylum seekers to centres in other countries while they await return. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the proposed law would help governments carry out deportations more quickly and effectively. Critics, however, argue that Europe's migration policy is becoming increasingly focused on deterrence and deportation. They say it does not do enough to address the causes of migration, including conflict, poverty, and political repression. The reforms still require final approval from the 27 EU member states. If adopted, they would mark one of the toughest shifts in EU migration policy since the arrival of more than 1 million refugees and migrants during the 2015 and 2016 migration crisis. Reports have suggested the EU is exploring possible cooperation with countries including Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. However, both governments have denied that talks are taking place.
A new shipment of Russian wheat has been sent to Armenia through Azerbaijan. 7 wagons carrying 490 tons of wheat departed from Azerbaijan Railways Bilajari station on Saturday, moving to Armenia via Azerbaijani transit routes. The shipment is part of a wider flow of goods from Russia to Armenia through Azerbaijan. So far, more than 29,000 tons of wheat, over 7,000 tons of fertilizer, and 414 tons of anthracite, and 133 tons of aluminum and 68 tons of buckwheat have been transported. Alongside transit cargo, Azerbaijan has also exported petroleum products to Armenia. Turning to sports now, World Cup fever is building across several fan bases after another dramatic round of group stage matches.
US fans left the stadium in Seattle celebrating after a 2-0 win over Australia secured their team a place in the last 32.
It was awesome. My first World Cup experience and amazing. Worth every penny of the ticket cost to be here today on a beautiful day and watch US win.
The United States sealed a second straight group stage win through an early own goal and an Alex Freeman header. Australia fans said the US started stronger, but felt their team still battled through the match.
They were a bit too good for us early, but I thought we battled on all right, probably should have scored. So not in general, not too bad. I'm happy with how we went.
In Philadelphia, Brazil fans celebrated a 3-0 win over Haiti, their first victory of the tournament after an opening draw with Morocco. Supporters praised Brazil's attacking stars and said the 5-time champions were still alive in the race for a 6th title. But Haiti fans said they were proud to see their team compete against Brazil in their first World Cup appearance since 1974.
Man, just so you guys know, this is not a loss for Haiti. This is a win for us. Just because Brazil beat us 3-0, that doesn't mean that we lost. After 52 years, we have an opportunity to play in the World Cup, but against Brazil. Do you understand that's a win for us?
In Casablanca, Moroccan fans celebrated their team's 1-0 win over Scotland in Group C.
Thank God, the players were at their best, and we earned 3 crucial points. We hope to reach the semi-finals, and then the final, and hopefully win the trophy this year.
Morocco now have 4 points from 2 matches and will face Haiti next, while Brazil take on Scotland on the final group match day.
This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay tuned to A News for more updates.